essential ingredients that you need to possess to realize the promises of God. You know, any good recipe has some essential ingredients, right? You got, and I know this because my mother and some of you have been privy to this, or maybe I should say some of you have been privileged to partake of my mother's pound cake, and we keep her in our prayers this morning because she's been physically challenged this week. Uh, but there's some essential ingredients in a cake. There is sugar. Somebody want to help me preach this? There is flour. Thank you, Angel. There's eggs, butter. Katie, you looking at me like you want to add something. In a pound cake, what's essential? Vanilla. And sugar. There's some essential. So if you want to enjoy the product, you got to have the ingredients. And so there are some essential ingredients to possessing the promises of God. Has God made anybody any big promises in here? I'm not talking about you all goals that we set at the beginning of the year, because some of us set goals without even consulting God. And I'm not getting on you. I'm not fussing at you. I'm just saying it is what it is because I've done it before. And some goals are set that we spend time praying over goals that don't need to be prayed over or prayed for. You can pray over them, but you don't have to pray and ask God for help in order to accomplish those goals. Why? Because a lot of hard work will accomplish those goals. God gave you the ability. He's already given you what you need, the ability, the skill set, the intelligence to be able to accomplish certain goals. But there are some goals that can't nobody but God accomplish for you. And I want us to enter into a place where we stop bothering God with stuff He's already given you the ability to go out and get done on your own. When we seek God from this day forward, let's not ask God for little crackerjack promises. Let's ask God for promises that God, if you don't get involved in this situation, it's not going to come to pass. And so I told Restoration in Arkansas last week, I said, I'm going to stop asking God to retire Restoration's debt. I'm going to ask God to leverage Restoration in a place to where we have $1 million set aside that we can purchase homes for single mothers to dwell in, those who have been set aside, and those who have been marginalized, those who are not being helped by our communities. I want to be a blessing to others, not just get my bills paid, but I want to be positioned to be a blessing to others. Is anybody with me? You want to ask God for big promises? Promises that it'll take God to bring about in your life. And so it's one thing just to set goals, but it's another thing to receive the promise of God into your heart. And Jesus gave his disciples in this text a promise. He says, get in the boat and go to the other side. The promise is this: I'm going to meet you on the other side. Now, storm arose. I call it a big P, a big problem came about. You see, for every promise is the prerequisite for a problem. You can never have a promise without a problem. Somebody say it's the big P. It's the big P. There is a problem attached to every promise. So isn't it something that when we receive a promise from God, how we get all excited about it, we start rejoicing? I wish I had that Super Bowl music now. And we just get excited about the promises of God. We start screaming, kind of like those people. What is that commercial where they knock on the people's door, they ring the people's doorbell, and the Publishers Clearinghouse. Don't you just dream of the Publishers Clearinghouse showing up at your door, ringing your doorbell? Well, what if they showed up tomorrow? How would you act? Now, y'all know y'all would be way more excited than what you're showing right now. I'm talking about the video would never cease from being viral on Facebook if it was me. They said that boy is acting a flat-out fool. And that's how we do about the promises of God. Patricia, we get excited about the promises of God, but listen, it's okay to be excited about the promises of God, but don't be disillusioned when you see the storm on the horizon. Oh, ain't nobody saying nothing. Has anybody ever received a big promise where God told you, I'm going to do this for you, I'm going to do this for you? You said, woo, God, I can't wait. Woo, God, I'm excited about it. But then the car breaks down. Then the washing machine breaks down a week later. But then the dryer breaks down 2 weeks later. Storms. This is what I call storms. For every promise, there is a problem. And the problem, listen. We think promises annul problems. Promises do not annul problems. Promises are the prerequisites or for problems. Where there's a promise, there's a problem. And then problems, if I switched it and reversed it, then the problems is a prerequisite for promises. Where there's a problem, there's a promise. Boy, that should have preached real good to somebody right there. Where you are experiencing a storm in your life, you got a big promise over your life. I feel like I'm supposed to talk to somebody right in that digital world right now watching me, that if you're experiencing a storm, there is a huge promise over your life right now. I wish somebody would just get faith and go ahead and start celebrating just right now, thanking God for the huge promise that's over your life. Father, I thank you for the huge promise that's over my life. Because Lord knows I've seen some storms, and every storm means I got a big promise. Hallelujah. Oftentimes when God gives a promise, we think that the problem no longer has to be dealt with. You do have to deal with the problem. God is not going to allow you not to deal with the problem. You got to face the problem. You got to deal with the problem, and you got to trust God. Say, I got to trust God. Here's the two things that you are expected to do in a storm is to have faith, trust God, and rest. Rest means believe that it's already done. It's already done. It's already been dealt with. It's already been dealt with. Because wherever there's a problem, let me help you, because some of y'all looking sad because I've been spending about 2 minutes talking about problems. But let me tell you, I'm not focused on the problem. What I'm trying to focus on is, yes, there is a problem, but wherever there's a problem, God's already given you the solution for it. Where I got a problem, God's already placed in me the solution for the problem. Listen, let me help you out. Jesus Christ, he did not tell the disciples about the problem. He told them about the promise. Why is it that God don't tell us up front about the storms we got to go through? Because if most of y'all are like me, as soon as I hear about the problem, I'm probably going to go the other direction. Because I'm just like they used to say back in the 80s, can't we all just get along? Why we got to have problems in our life, Father? But where there is a problem, God has already placed inside of you everything you need to deal with the problem. That's why he don't tell you about the problem. He tells you about the promise. God's not trying to find out what's in you. God's trying to reveal to you what's in you. And without the problem, you won't know what's inside of you. So he don't tell you about the problem. He says, I need the problem so the problem can work for me. So the problem can help you to understand what's in you. So we don't stay stuck. Somebody say, I'm not going to stay stuck. Some problems, here's my PowerPoint number 3, some problems come as a result of God's promises. I've been walking with God for long enough to understand this, that where there are big problems, there are big promises. I think I shared this testimony with many of you. I don't know how many of you have heard this. When God told me and my wife to go to Charlotte, we have a board for Howard International Ministries, and we shared with our board what God was having us do. And our board said, we love you all. We don't want you to get to Charlotte and suffer financially. So we want you to have at least $50,000 in the bank before you go. Well, that don't sound like a problem to many of you, if you got $50,000 laying around. The problem was I had a dilemma. God told me to go to Charlotte. But my other dilemma is that I submitted myself to a group of people who I know have my best interest at heart, and they're counsel to me. And they said, we think you should do this. And so I said, well, if that's my counsel, then I'm going to surrender. I'm going to trust God that he's speaking through them, and I'm going to obey counsel. And so I did. We didn't make a move until we had $50,000 in the bank. Now, first problem is this: where I'm going to get $50,000 from. See, when you got problems, stop trying to figure out how you're going to solve it. Stop trying to figure out how it's going to get taken care of. Just start obeying God. I'm talking to somebody. Where there is a big promise, just start out. Get in the boat. Just say, get in the boat, get in the boat, get in the boat. Just get in the boat and take out and do what God told you to do. And as soon as you get in the boat and do what God tells you to do, a problem may arise. Don't start trying to figure out how you're going to deal with the problem. Long story short, a gentleman came up to me and my wife, true story, one Sunday after church. I think it was about a couple of months after God, after we had really announced it to the church that this is what God had told us to do. There was no turning back. As soon as we announced it to the church, God says, I got you now. A gentleman came up to us and he said, me and my wife, we have been praying about if we were to move to Charlotte with you all to help you launch the second campus there. He said, but I don't think that we are supposed to do that. But this is what we think that we feel led to do. And he pulled out a check out of his pocket and he placed it in our hands. And he said, we feel like we're supposed to give this to you and Pastor Jeanette. And he says, this is not for something he was very, very specific. He says, this is not for the church lunch. He says, this is for you personally. He says, because I have been in the corporate world for several years and I've had to make several big moves and I know what it's going to take to move your family. And he gave us a check for, y'all ready to shout, $47,000. Now, many of y'all not shouting because y'all think I'm just telling a little story. Y'all think that we just reading a little something out of the Bible that happened to Peter, James, and John. No, that happened to Dexter Howard. And that didn't happen in Jesus' days when he was walking the earth. That happened in 2014. Somebody said that happened today. So what am I telling you is that just like Jesus gave his disciples the wherewithal to make it through a storm, today he's still providing the wherewithal for you to make it through your storm. I don't care how big it is. I don't care what it looks like. You got what it takes. Somebody say, I got what I need. No, say it with faith. I got what I need. You get what you need. I know it don't look like you have anything but 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, but you got what you need. Why did I say 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread? Because moments earlier, before Andrew, they got in the storm. Moments earlier, they were watching a miracle take place before their very eyes. Come on, y'all, we got to read the word. Before they got in the boat, Mia, moments earlier, not weeks earlier. I can understand we forget things when we go to sleep and get up and wake up and we forget maybe a little detail about something happened the day before. This was moments earlier. They had just saw 5,000 men, not including women and children who were there also, be fed by Jesus. Matter of fact, let me go back and reverse that. Jesus blessed the 2 fish and 5 loaves. But he gave the loaves and the fish to the disciples and he said, now you go feed them. And the fish, literally, every time they went and gave it to the people, the fish multiplied in their hands. And how quickly we forget how good God was 2 hours before that. When storms arise. And so he would always take your little bit. I know it looks like you got a little bit. And every time God tells us to do something, it's going to always look like we don't have enough. I'm talking to somebody. It's going to always seem like you don't have enough. It's going to always seem like there's not enough money. It's going to always seem like there's not enough support. It's going to always seem like there's not enough favor, or you don't have enough information, or you don't have enough of whatever you feel like you need. It's going to always look like 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread in your hand until you put it in Jesus' hands. Oh, I'm preaching real good right there. You got to take what you got. It's going to not be enough for you. But when you let it be released from your hands and put it in Jesus' hands, that's when it becomes enough. Somebody say it's enough in God's hands. Say my little bit is more than enough in the hands of God. And so here's the recipe. I want to end with this, the recipe for getting God results in your life. How many of you want God results? I'm talking about God results. I'm not talking about man's results. I'm talking about God. I'm talking about when I look at it, I know you didn't do that. You see, when I showed you that $47,000 check, if I was to have showed it to you, you would have said, Pastor, I know you didn't do that. This must be God. Yeah, I want God results in my life. And so I want to give you the recipe for God results in your life. PowerPoint number 5, the essentials for possessing God's promises is this. I'm going to give them to you because I may not be able to finish them. So I'm going to give them to you, and I'm just going to start on the first one. The mission. You got to master the mission. You got to master the material. And you got to master the moment. Say, I got to master the mission. Come on, y'all talk a little bit louder than that. I got to master the mission. I got to master the material. And I got to master the moment. What are the 3 essentials for possessing God's promises? Just a quick test. What? Number 1, you got to what? Number 2, you got to what? And number 3, you got to what? You got to master the moment. All these things Jesus Christ said, you see me do, you're going to do these things and you're going to do them greater. Why was Jesus Christ able to release his faith to feed all those people? It's because he mastered the mission, he had mastered the material, and he mastered the moment. Why was Jesus Christ able to walk on waves, on top of the water, and go to the disciples in the middle of the storm? Because he mastered the mission. Y'all help me. He mastered the material, and he mastered, and he says, in all these things you have seen me do, you will do these things and greater. It doesn't mean you need to go out on Lake Wiley and say it's time to walk on the waves today. I don't want to get nobody in trouble. That's not what that's referencing. What that's talking about is that when you come into stuff that seems bigger than you, it will not swallow you. It will not drown you, and you will come out triumphant. All these things you see me do, you're going to do these things and greater. So Jesus said, get in the boat and go to the other side of the lake. Now, this was a huge promise. Say this was a huge promise. Say it again. This was a huge promise. You got to master how big the promise is and make God bigger than the promise. You got to make God bigger than how imposing the promise looks to you. If the promise looks bigger than what you have made your God, then whatever you're facing is always going to take you down. I got an example, David and Goliath. David's looking at Goliath. David looked at Goliath. Goliath, he was huge. He was an imposing figure. I believe theologians say he was about 9 feet tall. And he had all of this armor on. He looked imposing. But David says, I'm going to bring you down today. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have your head. Why? Why was David able to talk so confident? It's because Goliath was not too big for David, because David had already made his God bigger than Goliath. Say, you got to make your God bigger than the promise, or bigger than the problem, actually. So you got to master the mission. You got to get started. When God tells you to do something, stop focusing on the stuff that you don't have and focus on what matters most. Focus on what you do have. And what you do have is you got a promise. That's how you master the mission. You said, I got a promise from God, and God is all I need in this situation. So when God tells me to do something, then I'm going to set out to do it. Number two, you got to master the material. Jesus comes walking on the sea toward their boat. He starts to pass them by. As we talked about, Jesus said, don't be afraid, it's me. Peter said, Lord, if it's you, show me it's you. He says, let me come to you. And Jesus said, go for it, Peter. And Peter got out the boat and he started walking on the material without even thinking about, this is not supposed to be holding me up. He was walking on something that was not supposed to ideally hold him up. He was supposed to go down. And that's how you master the material, is you look at stuff that's not supposed to work naturally and you say, you know what? Put in the hands of God, this is going to work for me. Somebody said, this is going to work for me. Say it again, this is going to work for me. Yeah, it may not work in somebody else's hands because you hadn't put it in the hands of God. But what I take, my little bit, and what I take and put in the hands of God, it's going to work for me. It's going to work for me. You got to master the material. Master the material. Master the material. I remember when we were in Waddell Language Academy, and we were needing to move out of Waddell Language Academy, and we had identified this building. And when we walked in this building, it was just one empty shell. It was just one big room, and this is small in comparison to what we built in Arkansas. Very, very small. But to the people that was with us at that time, it was like, what are we going to do with this place? How is this going to work? But see, when God gives you a vision, stop focusing on how it can't work and start focusing on how God's going to do it. Yeah. I'm not going to focus on how this won't work here. There's a wall here that ain't gonna work. There's not enough of this over here. There's not enough of this over here. No, you walk into it, and if you get God's green light, you say, well, no matter how it's gonna come together, I believe it's gonna work out for my good. Now that's shouting material right there. Somebody say it's gonna work out for my good. Master the material. You got to master the material. You got to master the money. When the money don't look right, when the money don't look like it's enough, you got to master it. And you say, well, God, I may not have enough money, but God, I believe you can take this and do abundantly with it, exceeding abundantly above all that I could ever ask or think. How many of you believe God can do it? I said, how many of you believe God can do it? When we came to Charlotte, I got one more and I'm done. When we came to Charlotte, our budget for launching this ministry was $100,000. And I'd already communicated that I'm not going to ask our Arkansas campus to help with this launch because I just didn't want to drain the ministry there for the launch here. All I can tell you, it's a lot involved in this story, and I don't have the time to get into it. But all I can tell you is in August of 2015, we had $100,000 in the bank. $100,000 in the bank. What did we start with? Zero. The zero we started with was enough because it was mixed with faith. I'm talking to somebody. Your zero, what looks like zero, you got something. Say, I got something. Boy, if I had time, I could stop and preach right there. You got something. Say that, I got something. Say it again, I got something. Tell your neighbor on both sides, you got something. And listen, if you don't have nothing but breath, you got something. If you don't have nothing but hands to move, you got something. If you don't have nothing but a mind to believe what God said, you got something. And we got to learn to use the something that we got and stop focusing on what we don't have. You got to master the material. And lastly, you got to master the moment. You got to master the moment. I'm done. Jesus told Peter, go for it. Get out the boat. Peter got out the boat without even thinking about what could happen. He got out the boat, not listening to all the naysayers who were still in the boat. That boy crazy. If he get out the boat, he gonna sink. Peter, what are you doing? How do you know that's really Jesus? It could really be a ghost. Peter blocked out all the naysayers. That's how you master the moment. You got to block out every lying voice in your head. Say you got to block it out. You got to block out everything that does not sound like the voice of God. And you know how you know it's not the voice of God? It's lying against the promise of God. Yeah. It's saying what you can't do, what you shouldn't do, how it's not going to work out, how you're going to go down if you do this. It is the lie of the devil. I'm done. Go ahead and stand to your feet. We're gonna take communion really, really quick. But I remember driving from Fayetteville, Arkansas, me and my family of eight. Me and my family of eight, we were right around Birmingham, Alabama. I'll never forget it. We were coming out of Memphis. I don't know how many of you ever driven this route before, but coming out of Memphis, we were coming into Birmingham. We just came through Mississippi. And all the way from the Arkansas border to the Mississippi, Alabama border, I was overwhelmed with the voice of the enemy. You fool, what have you done? You just made the biggest mistake of your life. This will never work. This is going to go under. You're going to lose your whole church. What's going to happen to you and your family? It became so overwhelming to me, Mia, that I literally had to almost pull on the side of the road. And I began to hear the voice of the Lord say, that's not me talking. That's not me talking. Realize who's talking to you. And Brother Thomas, when we woke up the next morning, we spent the night with my wife's aunt in Montgomery, Alabama, and we woke up the next morning, we were driving through Atlanta on the way to Charlotte. God tell me over and over again, he says, provision is where you're going. Provision is where you're going. Provision is where you're going. And it's almost like the enemy's voice began to be quailed. So much so to the point where I no longer heard those negative voices in my head. All I could hear was the goodness of God's voice. That's how you're going to master the moment. Because God is going to require something big of you this year. I keep coming to you, Sharita. I prayed this over you yesterday at the leadership retreat, at the leadership summit. But not just for Sharita, but I believe there's others in this room, if not all of us in this room. Something huge is going to be required of us this year. And you're going to have to master the moment. You're going to have to overcome your fear. You're going to have to overcome your doubts. You're going to have to overcome your, watch this, your past disappointments. Because if you're not careful, you'll let what didn't happen last year keep you from stepping out this year. You got to master the moment. Say, master the moment. Has every day been a wonderful day? Absolutely not. But wherever there's a big promise, there's a big problem. And I'm not trying to speak gloom and doom. I'm just trying to be factual. But here's another fact. Wherever there's big problems, God has big solutions. And Jesus will come walking to you in the midst of your storm. He is not going to let the storm take you out. He'll come walking to you in the midst of the storm. And when he comes to you in the midst of the storm, you got to begin placing your focus on him and not the elements around you, not what's going on around you. Master